Okay, I'm going to go through these slides really quickly. You can pause if you want to see them, or if you can't tell what it shows on the video, they're online too. You have them in print. But this is chapter 24 and 25. Okay, so the People's Party, if you see the People's Party or the word populace in the question, and farmers is an option, it's probably farmers. Farmers were upset about the way they were being treated by the government, and they wanted the government to change. For example, to get off the gold standard. They wanted the U.S. to back up the money with silver or just not back it up with anything so that they could have enough money to pay their debts. They also wanted this graduated income tax where your tax rate is based on how much money you make, as opposed to a flat tax where everybody pays the same percent. It's based on the more money you make, the higher percentage of taxes you pay. They felt like that was more fair. They wanted the government to take over ownership of the trains and the telephone and the telegraph, meaning instead of private companies owning that, like capitalism, they wanted the government to own it. And that the idea is the government could be more fair. We didn't talk too much about direct election of senators or one limit, term limit for president or any of those. We'll talk about those later. Okay, so labor. It says, what is labor? Labor is workers. Okay, and there was a lot of conflict in this time in the late 1800s between workers and owners. So, for example, the Homestead strike were some Pittsburgh steel workers who were angry because the Carnegie Steel Company cut their pay, and they wanted the company to increase their pay to what they felt was a more fair wage, and the company tries to use violence to stop them because the workers go on strike, they won't work, and there's just a big conflict in this time between workers and owners, which leads to the beginning in the U.S. anyway of the labor movement. The labor movement is basically, labor movement equals unions equals organized labor. They're all the same thing. The labor movement refers to the formation of unions to fight against and to have rights against the owners of big companies. So one of the ways unions work is they use collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is where the union members vote for a president or a vice president of their union, and those people represent everybody in the union, and they go negotiate with the owners for things like wages, salaries, hours, working conditions, and they come up with a contract, they come up with an agreement, and take it back to their union members who then vote on the contract. And if the majority of the union members say yes, then that becomes the contract for everybody, even people who don't like it. So this is instead of the old days where if you didn't like what your boss was doing or you didn't like your job or whatever, you could quit and just take care of it yourself. Whereas with this system, that wasn't possible. Like you're in the union, whatever the whole group agrees to, you agree to. And then it gives some specific unions. The Knights of Labor was one of the first ones, the American Federation of Labor. And what's unique about those at that time is they're both national unions, not just for one company in one location, but for many, many, many companies of the same kind of workers all across the United States. And then it lists some famous strikes, the Great Railway Strike, the Pullman Strike.
All students know that we need to start gathering our belongings and making our way out the building so we can prepare for tonight's parent discovery
that's an
night
announcement.
with our junior and senior parents.
That's
I ask
fine.
that all students who are not volunteering or meeting directly one-on-one with a teacher, please gather all your belongings and make your way out the front door. If you are a junior or senior, please make sure your parents will be here tonight. And 9th and 10th grade students, your parent discovery night is tomorrow night. Thank you and have a great evening.
Sorry for the announcement. So the Supreme Court in the beginning was super hostile to unions. They did not support unions. The government in general was in favor of the businesses, not the unions in the start. Transcontinental Railroad, super easy. The Transcontinental Railroad was a railroad that linked the East Coast and the West Coast by the railroad. It was aimed mostly at commerce, meaning moving goods, not people. Okay, it talks about the Golden Spike. I forgot to teach that, but basically where the West and East meet here at Promontory Point, they put down a big golden nail. Okay, this slide is kind of hard. Stopping the abuses of capitalism. So capitalism, in the view of many people at this time, was unfair to poor people and unfair to workers. So they wanted to stop this abuse, and they wanted the government to step in. However, the attitude of many people was the government shouldn't step in. The government's job was not to control businesses, like let businesses do what they do. If a business is treating its workers bad, the workers can all quit, and maybe they'll treat their workers better. But that wasn't working in real life. So the government is pushed to get involved through the Interstate Commerce Clause. The Constitution says that the Congress can make laws about trade between two states or more. And so almost all the big businesses back then traded between different states. Very few were only in one state. So that was a way for the government to get involved. In Wabash versus Illinois or Munn versus Illinois, these court cases, basically says that only the federal government can make laws about interstate commerce, not states. You learned that way back at the beginning of the year, and Gibbons v. Ogden is the same thing. The Interstate Commerce Act was a law that was the first federal regulatory rulemaking agency. That means it's the first agency of the government that it didn't just enforce the law, it made rules about how the laws are carried out, specifically about trade between states. So the effect of all this is that the government gets more and more involved in making rules about what states can do and what they can't do. And then the bottom of the slide talks about trusts and pools. Pools I won't go into too much, but the basic idea is the same. Companies working together secretly, illegally to crush competition. Okay, I gave the example, if Verizon and Sprint want to crush all the other cell phone companies, they'll make a secret agreement to have really cheap cell phone plans, put everybody else out of business, and then they'll raise their prices really, really high. That's illegal. The Gilded Age, we talked about this whole era is called the Gilded Age, and it refers to the fact that some people got very, very rich. Specifically, these people here, the J.P. Morgan in banking, Andrew Carnegie in steel, J.D. Rockefeller with oil, Madam C.J. Walker with her hair care products. They became very, very wealthy through their business enterprises. And they were very much admired and looked up to the point where some people looked at them as better than other people. And this idea of social Darwinism came about, where the wealthy and powerful were regarded as deserving to be wealthy and powerful because they worked hard, they had better attributes, better brains, whatever, and they got to be on top, and everyone should work hard like them. Of course, we point out there's problems with that. Not everybody started at the same level or with the same advantages or disadvantages. So, for example, African Americans, of course, no matter how hard they worked, they weren't going to get anywhere in the South with the discriminatory laws, unlike in the North where, for example, J.D. Rockefeller was white, so he didn't face the same kind of obstacles that many people did. So social Darwinism, a lot of people believed in it, but there were problems. All right, so the government starts to take action to stop the fat cats. The fat cats are the wealthy industrialists who controlled the country. These guys here, they not only control business, but of course they could control people in the government as well through their money and their friendships and their social circles. And so there starts to be a backlash against that, and the Sherman Antitrust Act basically made it illegal for businesses to do things to try to crush their competition through monopolies and trusts. So it wasn't okay for two companies to secretly work together to crush some other company, or for one company to control all the business in one area. The Gilded Age in the cities. So this just talks about how the fact that more and more people start moving to the cities in the late 1890s out of the countryside. And there's positive effects of that. It improves standards of living because the countryside was really poor back then. I mean, the water wasn't necessarily safe. There wasn't always enough food. Certainly there was no electricity.
It's called 2306, Miss Beniaco 2306.
Or anything like that. It also gave more jobs for women. On the countryside, women could basically make babies and cook and work on the farm that way. But in the city, they may get jobs as maids or clerks, or a woman could support herself without a family if she wanted. The negative things about the cities are skilled workers were replaced by semi-skilled workers, meaning if you work on a farm, you have to learn a lot of different things to know how to make the farm work. But to work in a factory in the city, you might just do one thing all day, screw one bolt in all day on a factory line. So it kind of took away some of the skills people used to have. And also, of course, the pollution, the conflict between different racial and ethnic groups, slums, unsanitary conditions in the city. Most of these big cities, of course, were centered in the Northeast, New York, Boston, Philly, Baltimore, New Haven, these places, because that's where the money was. That's where the factories originally were in America, and so that area booms. Helped by the railroads, of course, and the advent of the assembly line, which you know what that is. Immigration. We talked about immigration earlier in the week. Immigration, there was colonial immigration, which is the first Europeans to settle in the Americas, specifically from England and Scotland. That's where the New England colonies, the middle colonies, the southern colonies were largely settled at first by the English. Then comes the old immigration. The very first people to come after the English were the Irish and the Germans. The Irish came because of the potato famine. The potatoes in Ireland got sick, and there wasn't enough food to eat, so they came to the U.S. Germany had all kinds of problems, so they came to the U.S. to mostly farm.
Good afternoon, high school
Many
faculty.
Catholic-
If you are one of our faculty that will be working
just a
tonight's
moment.
Parent Discovery Night, we're going to pull together at 4:45 rather than 4:30 because we're trying to get report cards hopefully done. So 4:45
Okay.
in room 212 on the second floor, 4:45 in room 212 on the second floor. Thank you.
Great. Okay, sorry. Old immigration is the Germans and the Irish. And then the new immigration was a lot of poor people from Southern Europe, like Italy, Poland, Russia, Eastern Europe. Many of these people lived in very poor areas called ghettos in the city. They were really hard to assimilate. Assimilate means to join in a culture and become like that culture. They spoke languages that were not similar to English, unlike German and English, which was our brother-sister languages. Irish already spoke English for the most part. It's very difficult to learn English if you're Polish or Russian is your native language. Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. This goes into the African American history zone. Of course, after slavery ended, most African Americans became sharecroppers down south. However, slavery's over, so some young black boys in particular started to go to school, and Booker T. Washington was one of them. He felt that the path for African Americans to get ahead was for their young men to go to school, learn how to do a trade, a vocation, like fixing cars, building furniture, doing plumbing, and then they could get a good job, make money, and African Americans could rise up slowly that way. W.E.B. Du Bois, he's from the North. He wanted equality now. He wanted to directly confront the inequality in America and fight against racism. So it was sort of a parallel between Booker T. and W.E.B. Du Bois. The same conflict existed between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Very similar kind of ideas. Mark Twain wrote stories for ordinary people. Carrie Nation was a very anti-alcohol. Skip that. National Grange so now we're going to go faster. The National Grange was about farmers working together, first just so they weren't lonely, basically, and then to change things for the better for farmers. Same thing, Populist Farmers Alliance in Texas. These are organizations that wanted to help farmers. It gives more details there. I'm not going to go into it a lot. Again, the populist agenda, I've gone through this on multiple slides. Like, what did the populists, the progressives, these farmers want? And they wanted all these things. They wanted basically the government to get more involved in making things fair. That's how you sum it up. They wanted the government to take action to make things fair. This talks about some of the strikes, the Pullman strike, those fancy rail cars that people used to sleep and have bathrooms in their train car. Those were really nice, but the factory workers who made those got treated like crap. And there was a full-out riot when they went on strike. The company did something evil. The company, like, a lot of these people the workers lived in houses owned by their employer. So the Pullman company not only gave them a job, but it owned their house. And they cut wages The company cut their pay and then raised their rent, and workers just were angry, of course, and there was a big strike and a lot of anger, a lot of violence, and the government crushed it. The government found a reason to arrest these people and fight against the workers, just to show you how the government was not on the side of workers in the beginning. 1896, there's an election between McKinley and Bryan. McKinley's a Republican, Bryan was a Democrat. The big issue was whether or not to keep using gold to back up the money. Bryan gave a famous speech where he said, "Don't crucify America on a cross of gold," meaning America shouldn't die just so our money can be backed up by gold. Let's use silver or paper or something. Just stop being obsessed with gold. But he lost. He ran for president like 3 times, never won. The winner was McKinley, who was just sort of a standard Republican at that time. All right, Native Americans, super easy. So Native Americans, whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Where am I going? Okay, Native Americans, by this time in the late 1800s, mostly all lived out west. They had been pushed out of the east. There weren't very many Native American tribes left in the East Coast because of all the years of oppression and Trail of Tears and all that. So they're mostly out west. This gives you an idea like of the different tribes. Tatanka, we watched about how the buffalo were so important to the Sioux Indians. But once the white people from the east became involved and gave them guns, they ended up overhunting and pretty much destroying the buffalo population. The reservation system was the idea of what to do with the Native Americans. The idea was they can't just be roaming around like they used to all over the place. They're getting in trouble. There's problems, conflicts, violence. How about we set aside certain areas of these states, these big orange things, where Native Americans can live? And those are called reservations. A lot of these reservations, supposedly the Indians agreed to live there, but really the U.S. bribed chiefs, Indian chiefs, or just worked with Indian chiefs who didn't even represent all the tribes to make fake agreements, and the reservations were horrible. Like, they were not nice places. They're the worst land available, and it just fed alcoholism and addiction. Battle of Little Bighorn was a battle where the Indians won. The natives, the American army was out there supposedly looking for scientific information. In reality, they were looking to kill Indians, and the Indians mastered a plan and killed them. And that only prompted the government to send more soldiers out west. And this gives some pictures. This picture of the Battle of Little Bighorn. It's pretty famous. It's interesting if you read about it. You have to watch the video, read online. Apaches and Geronimo, these are just basically some of the last Native Americans to fight back against the American government. The Indians didn't just lay down and take it. A lot of them fought for many years. And the U.S. government used all kinds of tricks, like a heliograph is like a signaling system. It's a mirror, and you flash the mirror in the sun according to a code to send messages across long distances. But it scared the Indians. They didn't know what it did, and it just showed how the U.S. government would go stop at nothing to push the Indians off the land. Bison, buffalo is the same. I mean, there's some difference, but it's not important for the history test, and how they died. This is where they used to live, but not anymore. Battle of Wounded Knee was this so-called battle. Most people call it a massacre. The Native Americans were massacred by the U.S. Army. Supposedly because they were dangerous, they were going to attack settlers. But in reality, it was just a slaughter. This is full of graves, dead people killed by the U.S. Army, many of them women and children who presented no threat. The Dawes Severalty Act is highly tested. The Dawes Severalty Act was the sort of good idea, not really great idea, but sort of good idea to help the Indians. Now, what it really did is kill their culture. The idea was that if Indians would live on the land and farm it and dress like white people and go to white people church and like speak white people language, English, and sort of give up their Indian ways, then they could live in the house forever and they would be happy and it's great. But it asked them basically to give up their Indian culture. And it also didn't, a lot of the Indians got screwed in this agreement. Many of the people took advantage of them and didn't follow through with the agreement. A lot of the land was ended up going to white East Coast people anyway. Today, Native Americans are still around, of course. They're highly integrated into American society. There are still reservations, still with problems, but there's also this new promise of casinos. Don't have to do that. That's it.